My name is Chelsea. I'm 32 years old, and this afternoon my father didn't even have the decency to call me himself. Instead, his personal assistant delivered the message that would end our family forever. The voice on the line was cold, professional, and dripping with disdain. Ms. Chelsea, your father has strictly requested that you do not appear at the launch party tonight. He said a homeless person like you doesn't deserve to be seen among the elite guests. Your presence would only soil the reputation of the family. Please stay away from the resort. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just looked down at my boots caked in the red dust of the Arizona desert and said, "Understood. Tell him to enjoy the night." I hung up and stared at the glittering glass building in the distance, the very place they banned me from entering. They thought I was defeated. They thought I was just the disappointment, the laborer living out of a truck. But they made a fatal miscalculation. Fast forward 6 hours. The silence of the desert night was shattered by the scream of police sirens. The high society gala was in absolute chaos. My brother, the so-called genius of the family, was being shoved into the back of a squad car, handcuffs cutting into his wrists, his face pale with terror. My parents stood frozen in the center of the ballroom watching a massive LED screen that was broadcasting their darkest secrets to 200 horrified guests. And over the PA system, my voice announced 4 simple words: "The party is over." Before I tell you how they lost everything in a single night, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe, but only if you want to see justice served cold. I'm curious, where are you listening from right now? Drop your city and local time in the comments below. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to the scorching heat where this final betrayal began. To understand why my own father would bar me from a property I secretly owned, you have to understand the lie they built their entire lives around. It started a decade ago in a lawyer's office in downtown Phoenix. I was 22, fresh out of college, with a degree in landscape architecture and a heart full of naivety. My parents, Robert and Linda, sat across from me, sliding a document across the mahogany table. It was a waiver of inheritance. "It's just a formality, Chelsea," my mother had said, her voice dripping with that sickly sweet tone she used when she wanted something. "Brandon needs the capital to launch his tech firm. Once he's successful, he'll take care of all of us, including you." They liquidated my grandmother's trust money that was specifically designated for my graduate studies and handed every cent to my older brother. When I refused to sign away my future for Brandon's gamble, the sweetness evaporated. They gave me an ultimatum: sign the papers or leave the family. I left. I walked out into the Arizona heat with nothing but a duffel bag and a burning resolve. For 10 years, I worked from the bottom up. I started digging trenches for irrigation systems, hauling rocks, and planting cacti under the blistering sun. My skin tanned deep bronze, my hands developed permanent calluses, and my clothes were perpetually stained with red dust. To my family, these were signs of failure. Whenever our paths crossed, usually at obligatory funerals or distant relative weddings, they looked at my work boots with undisguised disgust. They assumed I was a day laborer, barely scraping by, living paycheck to paycheck in some trailer park on the outskirts of Mesa. They didn't know about the land. 5 years into my exile, while scouting locations for a client, I found a desolate stretch of desert north of Scottsdale. Everyone else saw dry scrub and scorpions. I saw an oasis. I poured every dollar I had saved, took out massive loans that kept me awake at night, and bought those 300 acres when the market was at rock bottom. I designed every inch of desert oasis myself. I didn't just build a resort. I cultivated a sanctuary that blended seamlessly with the natural landscape. When it opened, it became the retreat for Silicon Valley billionaires and Hollywood royalty seeking privacy. But I never put my face on the brochures. I operated through a holding company, Terra Verde Ventures, and let my management team handle the spotlight. I preferred the dirt. I preferred the work. To the world, and especially to my family, I was just a ghost in a high-visibility vest. That anonymity was exactly what Brandon was banking on. My brother's tech firm had imploded years ago, a detail he conveniently glossed over at family dinners. Now he had pivoted to finance. He was launching the Future Fund, a venture capital scheme that promised impossible returns to investors who didn't know better. And to sell a lie that big, he needed a stage that screamed legitimacy. He needed the Diamond Hall at Desert Oasis. I had reviewed the booking request myself 2 months prior. Brandon had told his potential investors and our parents that he secured the venue through close personal connections with the ownership group. He boasted that the elusive owner was an old college buddy who owed him a favor. It was a complete fabrication, of course. The only reason his application wasn't rejected immediately due to his abysmal credit score was because I had flagged it. I watched him from afar as he toured the site with our sales director weeks ago. He strutted through the lobby in his least Italian suit, snapping his fingers at staff treating the very people who maintained my vision like servants. He pointed to the rare saguaro cacti I had personally transplanted and claimed to his entourage that he advised the landscape team on their placement. The owner and I go way back. I heard him tell a wealthy retiree from Sun City, clapping the man on the shoulder. He gave me the friends and family discount. That's the kind of access you get when you invest with me. My parents ate it up. They believed the illusion because they needed to. If Brandon was a genius, then their sacrifice of my future was justified. If he was a fraud, then they were just cruel parents who discarded their daughter for nothing. So they fiercely protected his narrative. They saw me hauling bags of fertilizer near the service entrance and panicked, terrified that my poverty would crack the pristine image Brandon had constructed. They didn't realize that the friends and family discount Brandon bragged about didn't exist. He hadn't paid the deposit yet. He was leveraging a house of cards, and he had unknowingly built it inside a fortress commanded by the very person he had stepped on to get there. 3 days before the scheduled launch, my phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Tiffany. My sister-in-law never contacted me directly unless she wanted to brag about a new designer handbag or complain about the service at her country club. This time, she suggested meeting at Chuck's Diner, a greasy spoon off Highway 87, that she wouldn't be caught dead in under normal circumstances. I arrived early, ordering black coffee and taking a booth in the back corner. Through the window, I watched Tiffany pull up in her silver Mercedes G-Wagon. She parked it behind a dumpster, clearly terrified that someone from her social circle might spot the vehicle in such a low-class establishment. She entered wearing oversized sunglasses that covered half her face and a scarf wrapped around her head like a celebrity avoiding paparazzi. "Chelsea," she whispered, sliding into the booth without removing her glasses. She didn't order anything. She just placed a manicured hand on the table and gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You look rugged, working hard." "What do you want, Tiffany?" I asked, cutting through the pleasantries. She sighed dramatically, pulling a thick manila envelope from her oversized tote bag. "Look, Robert and Linda are worried about you. They know things have been tight. And Brandon, well, he wants to extend an olive branch." She pushed the envelope across the sticky table. "We need extra hands for the logistics team at the event. It's just simple coordination work, checking vendors, directing traffic. But we need you to sign this non-disclosure agreement and liability waiver first. Standard procedure for an event of this magnitude." I opened the envelope. The document was thick, dense, with legal jargon. The cover page was titled Independent Contractor Agreement. It looked legitimate at a glance. Most people desperate for a paycheck would have signed it without reading past the first paragraph. But I wasn't desperate, and running a multi-million-dollar enterprise had taught me to read every footnote. I flipped past the indemnity clauses and the confidentiality sections. My eyes scanned the fine print on page 12. There, buried in a paragraph about incidental costs, was the trap. The signatory hereby agrees to assume full financial liability as guarantor for all venue rental fees, catering costs, and associated vendor payments in the event of default by the primary lessee. It wasn't a job offer, it was a guarantor agreement. Brandon hadn't secured the funding for the party. He was taking out a massive short-term line of credit to pay for the night, and the lenders required a co-signer with assets or at least a warm body to pin the debt on. They were trying to trick me into becoming the legal fall guy for a debt that likely exceeded $500,000. They assumed I was too uneducated to understand the contract, or too poor to fight it when the bill collectors came calling. Rage flared in my chest, hot and sharp, but I forced my face to remain blank. If I refused, they would just find another way to cover their tracks or worse, cancel the event and claim victimhood. I needed them to commit. I needed them to walk into the trap they thought they were setting for me. I could use the extra cash, I said, my voice steady. Is the pay good? Generous? Tiffany promised, her relief palpable. She handed me a gold-plated pen. Just sign at the bottom of the last page. I took the pen. I looked at the signature line. In my business dealings as the owner of Terra Verde Ventures. My signature was a precise, distinct script. But here I channeled the ghost of the girl they thought I was. I scribbled a messy, illegible scrawl that looked nothing like my legal signature on file with the state. I deliberately altered the loop of the C and skipped the middle letters of my last name. Legally, under Arizona law, I could argue non est factum that I was misled about the nature of the document, but the altered signature was my personal insurance policy. It proved intent to deceive on their part, not mine. I handed the document back. Tiffany snatched it up, not even checking the ink. "You're saving us a headache," she said, sliding out of the booth. "Don't be late on Saturday. And please, wear something clean." She left as quickly as she came, leaving me with cold coffee and the absolute certainty that war had been declared. I drove my battered Ford truck through the employee service entrance at the north end of the property, flashing my keycard at the security scanner. To the groundskeepers, I was just checking the irrigation lines for the upcoming event. But instead of heading to the maintenance shed, I took the service elevator down to the sub-basement, walked through a reinforced steel door, and entered the pristine glass-walled command center of Terra Verde Ventures. Marcus, my general counsel, and Elena, the chief financial officer, were already waiting at the conference table. The contrast was stark. They were in tailored suits, and I was still in my dusty work clothes, smelling of stale diner coffee. But when I sat at the head of the table, the atmosphere shifted instantly. "Pull it up," I commanded. Elena tapped her tablet, and the main projection screen illuminated with the dossier on Brandon's future fund. We had bypassed the standard booking logs and hacked into the digital prospectus Brandon had been emailing to his high-net-worth targets. What I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't just a party. It was a heist. He didn't just lie about knowing the owner. Marcus said, his voice tight with professional fury. He zoomed in on page 5 of the investment deck. Look at the footer. There, stamped clearly next to Brandon's logo, was the golden agave crest of Desert Oasis. Underneath it, bold text read, "Strategic Real Estate Partner and Guaranteed Asset Backing." "He forged our corporate seal," Elena explained, sliding a stack of printed emails across the table. "He's telling these investors, people putting in minimums of $50,000, that the resort is the collateral for his fund. He claims that if the market dips, Desert Oasis covers the losses. He's essentially selling equity in a property he doesn't own." I stared at the screen. This went beyond simple grifting or sticking me with a catering bill. This was federal securities fraud. Brandon was using the reputation of my life's work to lure retirees and local business owners into a Ponzi scheme. If the fund collapsed, and it inevitably would, the investors wouldn't just sue Brandon. They would sue Desert Oasis. They would claim we were complicit because we hosted the launch event and allowed our logo to be used. He was dragging my empire into his grave. "We have enough for a cease and desist order right now," Marcus stated, already opening his laptop. I can have a judge sign an injunction within the hour. We cancel the event, lock the doors, and issue a press release disavowing any connection to the future fund." "No," I said quietly. The room fell silent. Marcus looked at me like I had lost my mind. "Chelsea, the liability exposure here is catastrophic. If we let those people walk into that room, if we cancel now, Brandon spins the story." I interrupted, standing up and walking to the window that looked out into the subterranean server room. "He'll tell the investors that corporate bureaucracy killed the deal. He'll play the victim. He'll say he was on the verge of making them millions until the big bad resort shut him down. He'll walk away with their deposits, claim it was out of his hands, and vanish before the lawsuits hit." I turned back to them. "I don't want to just stop him. I want to end him." Elena took off her glasses. "What are you suggesting?" "Let the party happen," I said. "Let him get up on that stage. Let him present the fraudulent documents. Let him officially solicit the funds in front of witnesses." "That's entrapment," Marcus warned, though I could see the gears turning in his head. "It's not entrapment if we don't force him to do it," I countered. "We are simply the venue. But the moment he flashes that forged seal on the screen in the Diamond Hall, he commits a felony in real time. I want the police waiting in the wings. I want the SEC notification drafted and ready to send the second the handcuffs go on." I looked at the digital clock on the wall. The countdown to Saturday night had begun. "Prepare the evidence package," I ordered. "And Marcus, call the sheriff. Tell him we're going to have a crime in progress and I'm giving him a front row seat." By late afternoon, the scorching Arizona sun had begun its descent, painting the sky in violent shades of bruised purple and burnt orange. I stood on the terrace of the Eagle's Nest, a private observation deck on the 12th floor that was accessible only via a biometric scanner. From this vantage point, the Diamond Hall looked like a glittering jewel nestled against the red rocks. I watched as a fleet of trucks from high-end florists unloaded thousands of white orchids flowers that Brandon had charged to the account I was supposedly guaranteeing. Below me, the deception was taking physical form. Crews were hanging massive silk banners emblazoned with the Future Fund logo covering the tasteful stone architecture of my resort with Brandon's gaudy branding. It was a perfect metaphor for my family covering something solid and real with a cheap, flashy veneer. My phone vibrated against the limestone railing, breaking my trance. It was a text from Robert. I hadn't spoken to my father in months, not since he told me that my presence at Thanksgiving would be uncomfortable for his golf buddies. I unlocked the screen, bracing myself for the usual indifference. But this message was different. It was active hostility. "I saw you lurking near the service entry earlier. Listen to me closely. This night is the most important moment of your brother's life. We are on the brink of a legacy that you couldn't possibly understand. If you have a shred of dignity left, do not come anywhere near the VIP reception. I don't want our investors asking why the CEO's sister looks like she just crawled out of a landscaping ditch. Stay in the back, do your manual labor, and keep your mouth shut. Don't embarrass us." I read it twice. 10 years ago, those words would have crushed me. I would have cried in my truck wondering why I wasn't good enough, why my hard-earned calluses were a mark of shame rather than pride. But standing there looking down at the empire I had built from dust, I didn't feel sadness. I felt a profound, hollow pity. They were so small. They were terrified little people playing dress-up, convinced that a tuxedo and a leased title made them royalty. They were worried about dirt on my boots while standing in a pit of moral filth they had dug themselves. I didn't type a paragraph of defense. I didn't tell him that the ditch he despised was worth more than his entire net worth. I simply typed, "Don't worry, Robert. I'll be wearing the most appropriate outfit for the occasion." I hit send and turned my back on the view. Walking into the master suite of the penthouse, I pressed the intercom button on the wall. "Leo, bring the car around to the private elevator in 1 hour, and have the garment bag ready." "The navy dress, ma'am," my personal assistant asked through the speaker. "No," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "The black bespoke suit. The one I wore to the acquisition of the Scottsdale property. That suit wasn't just clothing, it was armor. It was sharp, severe, and commanded silence. It was the uniform of the executioner. And Leo, I added, pausing by the door. Call Sheriff Miller at the Maricopa County Precinct. Tell him I'm invoking the public safety clause of our venue contract. I need him and 2 deputies on site by 7 p.m. for a potential high-level security incident. Tell him to come to the main entrance, not the back. I want him to have a front row seat. Understood, Ms. Cross? Should I tell him who the target is? No. I replied, checking my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were cold, steady. Let's keep it a surprise. He prefers to see the evidence in person. The Diamond Hall was a masterpiece of acoustics and light designed to make every whisper sound like a declaration. Tonight, it buzzed with the chatter of 200 of Phoenix's wealthiest residents. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over silk tablecloths, and servers moved like ghosts through the crowd, refilling champagne flutes with vintage Dom Perignon. At the center of it all stood Brandon. He looked the part of the visionary tycoon, his smile practiced and dazzling under the spotlights. Robert and Linda sat in the front row, their chests puffed out with a pride that bordered on arrogance. Tiffany was beside them, already calculating the commission on the investments she assumed were about to pour in. They looked untouchable, a royal family holding court in a castle they believed they had conquered. "Ladies and gentlemen!" Brandon's voice boomed through the high-fidelity speakers. He spread his arms wide, encompassing the room. "Thank you for joining me on this historic night. The Future Fund isn't just an investment vehicle, it's a promise. A promise that with the right partners like the incredible team here at Desert Oasis, your wealth is not just secure, it is destined to grow beyond your wildest dreams." He paused for effect, waiting for the applause to ripple through the room. "I'm proud to announce that we have already secured our first round of strategic backing. And tonight, I invite you to join us. The future belongs to those who seize it." He gestured dramatically to the massive LED wall behind him, expecting the logo of his fund to pulsate in gold. Instead, the screen went black. The music cut out abruptly. A low, dissonant hum filled the silence like a high-tension wire about to snap. The crowd murmured, confused, glancing around for technical staff. Brandon tapped his microphone nervously. "A little technical difficulty, folks. Bear with us." Suddenly, the screen blazed back to life, but the golden logo was gone. In its place, giant crimson letters seared into the retina of every guest in the room. "Fraud alert, transaction blocked." A collective gasp sucked the air out of the hall. Brandon spun around, his face draining of color. Before he could signal the technicians to cut the feed, the image shifted. It was a slideshow moving with brutal, methodical speed. First, a bank statement from the Cayman Islands, heavily redacted but clearly showing a balance of negative $300,000. Next, a text message thread where Brandon bragged about milking the retirees dry before skipping town. Then, the undeniable smoking gun, a side-by-side comparison of the official Desert Oasis corporate seal and the clumsy forgery Brandon had pasted onto his prospectus. "What is this?" someone shouted from the back. "That's my signature on that contract. He's broke." Another voice cried out, pointing at the screen where a foreclosure notice for Brandon's leased condo was now displayed in high definition. The pristine atmosphere shattered. Investors who had been sipping champagne seconds ago were now standing up, their faces twisted with anger and panic. Robert stood up, waving his arms frantically at the control booth, screaming for them to kill the power, but the technicians had been locked out of the system. The evidence kept scrolling, a relentless digital indictment. Brandon stood frozen at the podium, the microphone slipping from his sweaty grip. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming train. He opened his mouth to speak, to spin another lie, to charm his way out of the abyss, but no sound came out. The visionary was gone. All that remained was a terrified con artist exposed under the unforgiving glare of the truth. The chaos in the ballroom was pierced by a sudden blinding spotlight that cut through the darkness like a blade. It originated from the mezzanine, sweeping down to illuminate the double mahogany doors at the rear of the hall. The heavy doors swung open with a definitive thud, revealing three silhouettes framed against the light. I stepped across the threshold. Gone were the denim work jeans and the dust-stained boots. I wore the black bespoke suit, its sharp lines tailored to perfection, paired with stilettos that clicked rhythmically against the marble floor. To my left walked Sheriff Miller, his hand resting on his holster. To my right was Marcus, holding a thick legal binder against his chest. We moved in unison, a phalanx of authority parting the sea of stunned millionaires. Robert and Linda, who had been screaming at the technicians moments ago, froze. Their eyes widened as they registered my face, but the context didn't compute. They were looking for a laborer, a disappointment, a daughter they could hide. Instead, they were looking at the person who owned the floor they were standing on. As we reached the edge of the stage, the general manager of Desert Oasis, a man named Elias, who had terrified Brandon during the site tours, stepped forward. He didn't look at my brother. He bowed his head slightly toward me, then raised a microphone to his lips. "Ladies and gentlemen, please direct your attention to the center of the room. It is my distinct honor to introduce the founder, chairman, and sole proprietor of Terra Verde Ventures and the Desert Oasis Resort, Ms. Chelsea Cross." The silence that followed was heavier than the heat outside. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp that sounded like a choke. Tiffany dropped her champagne flute. The crystal shattered on the floor, but no one looked down. I didn't stop walking until I was face to face with my parents. Up close, I could see the sweat beading on my father's forehead, the way his immaculate tuxedo suddenly looked like a cheap costume. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to scold me, perhaps to beg, but I walked past him without breaking stride. I climbed the stairs to the stage and stood before Brandon. My brother was trembling so violently that the podium was vibrating. He looked at me with the eyes of a trapped animal, a mixture of hatred and pathetic confusion. "You," he rasped, his voice barely audible without the microphone. "You're just the gardener. This is a trick." "No, Brandon," I said, my voice projecting clearly to the silent room. "The trick was thinking you could steal my life a second time." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the crumpled document Tiffany had given me at the diner. I held it up for the room to see. "3 days ago, you sent your wife to trick me into signing this. You told me it was a labor contract for a temp job, but in reality, it was a guarantor agreement designed to pin your debt on me when this fraudulent scheme inevitably collapsed." I took a step closer, forcing him to retreat, until his back hit the LED screen. "You thought you were setting up a homeless girl to take the fall, but you didn't check the signature, did you?" I flipped the page to the back, pointing to the deliberate scrawl. "I submitted the original to Sheriff Miller yesterday morning, along with the security footage of Tiffany handing it to me. Attempted fraud, forgery, identity theft, and securities fraud on a massive scale." Sheriff Miller stepped onto the stage. He didn't offer a polite warning. He spun Brandon around and slammed him against the podium. "Brandon Cross, you are under arrest." The sheriff boomed, his voice carrying to the back of the hall. The metallic clack-clack of handcuffs echoed like gunshots. "You have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use it." As the deputies hauled my brother away, dragging him past the investors he had tried to rob, I looked down at my parents. They stood amidst the shattered glass and the ruined dreams, looking up at the daughter they had thrown away, finally seeing her for the first time. And all they saw was judgment. The deputies began to drag Brandon toward the exit, his polished shoes scuffing uselessly against the marble. My parents didn't chase after him. They didn't call a lawyer. Instead, they turned on me with the ferocity of cornered rats. "You did this!" Linda shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. She pointed a trembling finger at my chest. "You knew. You let him walk into a trap. You're a monster, Chelsea. A cold-blooded monster. How could you destroy your own family like this?" Robert stepped forward, his face purple with rage. He's your brother. You saw him drowning and you just stood there and watched. You set us up. I looked at them, really looked at them for the first time in a decade without the filter of a child seeking approval. I didn't see parents. I saw parasites. They weren't mourning Brandon's crime. They were mourning the loss of their golden ticket. They weren't angry that he stole. They were angry that I caught him. I didn't set him up, Robert. I said, my voice calm, cutting through their noise like ice. He forged the documents. He stole the identity. He spent the money. All I did was turn on the lights. We're family. Linda sobbed, trying to grab my arm, but Sheriff Miller stepped between us. You can't do this to family. I laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. Family. You haven't been my family since the day you sold my future to pay for his ego. You didn't want a daughter. You wanted a tool. And when I stopped being useful, you threw me in the trash. You called me a disappointment. You called me homeless. You told me I wasn't worthy of this room. I gestured to the opulent hall around us. Well, I own this room, and I decide who is worthy. I turned to Elias, my general manager. Please record this for the official log. I faced the crowd of investors who were watching in stunned silence, witnessing the raw, ugly collapse of the Cross family dynasty. As the sole proprietor of Terra Verde Ventures, I announced, my voice steady and final. I am issuing a permanent criminal trespass order. From this moment forward, Robert Cross, Linda Cross, Brandon Cross, and Tiffany Cross are banned from all properties within the Desert Oasis portfolio. If they set foot on this land again, they will be arrested on sight. Robert's jaw dropped. The realization finally hit him, not just the legal trouble but the social excommunication. They were finished in Phoenix. Get them out of my sight, I ordered. Security guards moved in, firm but professional. They escorted my parents and a weeping Tiffany toward the exit, guiding them past the very people they had tried to impress. They looked small, defeated, and utterly ordinary. The heavy doors slammed shut behind them, sealing the tomb of my past. The room remained quiet. Then slowly, a waiter approached me with a tray. I picked up a glass of red wine. I didn't make a speech. I didn't apologize to the crowd. I simply walked to the edge of the stage, looked out at the empty space where my family had stood, and took a sip. The wine was rich, complex, and tasted entirely of freedom. I turned my back on the audience and walked off the stage. I had a resort to run, so that's how I reclaimed my name. I didn't do it with shouting matches or public brawls. I did it with a signature, a security camera, and the patience to let the truth do the heavy lifting. My parents wanted me to stay invisible, to be the shameful secret they could hide away. But the thing about secrets is that they tend to grow in the dark. I spent 10 years building an empire in the shadows, waiting for the moment when the light would shine on the right person. If there is one thing I want you to take away from my story, it is this. Your value is not defined by the people who refuse to see it. Toxic families will try to convince you that you are nothing without them, that their approval is the oxygen you need to survive. It's a lie. You can breathe just fine on your own. In fact, you might find that the air is a lot cleaner when you're not suffocating under their expectations. Don't wait for an apology that will never come. Don't wait for permission to be great. Build your own oasis. Build it so high and so strong that the people who look down on you have to crane their necks just to see how far you've risen. And when they finally knock on your door asking for a way in, you have every right to change the locks. Success is the best revenge, but peace is the ultimate victory. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had to cut ties to save yourself, or if you're currently building your own empire in the dark, let me know in the comments. I'm rooting for you. Until next time.